cerca de 20 anos, a África do Sul superou o apartheid, um regime odioso de segregação e discriminação racial que esmagava e humilhava a maioria negra. Sob a liderança de Nelson Mandela, conseguiu fazer o que parecia impossível, uma transição pacífica para uma democracia constitucional, multiétnica e multicultural. Hoje, o desafio é outro. É vencer a pesada herança de desigualdade social e falta de oportunidades deixada pelo apartheid. Gerar empregos, criar escolas, construir casas, levar saneamento, água e eletricidade a quem não tem, ou seja, garantir uma vida digna para todos. Sobre isso, nós vamos conversar com o presidente da África do Sul, Jacob Zuma, eleito em 2009.
But I think the challenge to reconstruct a country, to build a nation, is more difficult than a challenge to fight and defeat.
Os navegadores portugueses foram os primeiros europeus a chegar à região onde hoje existe a África do Sul. Em 1488, cruzaram o Cabo das Tormentas, que passou a se chamar então Cabo da Boa Esperança. Estava aberto o caminho marítimo para as Índias. A ocupação do território pelos europeus só começou um século e meio depois, quando colonos holandeses fundaram a cidade do Cabo e estabeleceram ali um entreposto comercial. Foi o começo de um processo de 300 anos de colonização que ignorou a sabedoria dos povos africanos. Ignorou sua cultura, sua tecnologia e seus conhecimentos da terra e do meio ambiente. A descoberta de diamantes e ouro no fim do século XIX atraiu imigrantes e despertou a cobiça das grandes potências da época, especialmente da Inglaterra. A África do Sul moderna começava, então, a ser desenhada. Os antigos colonizadores, também conhecidos como Africanos ou Boeres, entraram em guerra com os ingleses para proteger o território, mas foram derrotados em 1902 e tiveram que se submeter à coroa inglesa. O poder político ficou com os britânicos, o controle das minas também. Os africanos ficaram com as terras mais férteis. A segregação racial já existia desde o período colonial, mas em 1948 tornou-se lei. O apartheid proibiu os casamentos interraciais, mandou confinar os negros em guetos. Os negros só podiam circular fora dos guetos com passes especiais. Tampouco tinham acesso à educação e à saúde de qualidade. Na verdade, eram tratados como se fossem seres inferiores. As 4 décadas seguintes foram marcadas pela luta da população negra contra o apartheid. Entre as revoltas mais famosas estão a Marcha das Mulheres contra os Passes em 1956 e o Levante de Soweto, em 1976, quando estudantes foram às ruas protestar contra a decisão do governo de tornar o afrikaans, a língua dos brancos, um idioma obrigatório na rede de ensino. Durante todo esse tempo, a resistência da população negra foi dirigida pelo Congresso Nacional Africano, mais conhecido como ANC, por causa da sigla em inglês. O ANC é o partido de Nelson Mandela. Madiba, como Mandela é carinhosamente chamado pelos sul-africanos, passou 27 anos preso e tornou-se, no mundo todo, um símbolo da luta contra a discriminação racial e pela liberdade. O apartheid provocou o isolamento internacional da África do Sul e abalou profundamente a economia do país. Sem alternativas, o governo da minoria branca teve que ceder. Depois de longas negociações, Mandela foi libertado em fevereiro de 1990. A próxima etapa foi o fim do regime racista em 1994, quando Mandela foi eleito o primeiro presidente negro da África do Sul, sob o lema Dignidade e Liberdade. As maiores fontes de riqueza da África do Sul são a exploração de minérios, como o ouro e diamantes, e o turismo. O país tem também um parque industrial moderno e um setor de serviços pujante. A África do Sul tem mais de 1/3 do produto interno bruto da África subsaariana. A mudança de um regime racista para uma democracia multirracial é considerada a mais importante transição política dos tempos modernos.
the environment and the climatic change that's taking place in terms of politics, in terms of economics, and all of that jazz. You know, certain opportunities that my parents didn't have, I find myself having. I'm studying in a tertiary institution and empowering myself, which my father didn't have the opportunity to do that. I generally will think that my life has to turn out better than it did for my father.
Jacob Zuma é o terceiro presidente eleito depois do fim do apartheid.
And government
Jacob Zuma, the President of the Republic of South Africa.
O que foi mais difícil? Acabar com o apartheid e caminhar para uma democracia constitucional ou terminar com a desigualdade social?
Well, I think, as it is clear, the most difficult is to deal with social inequality. That's the most difficult one.
Mais difícil que o apartheid?
In a different sense, not necessarily in comparison, but in a different sense. Apartheid was a system designed to oppress other people, to give others privileges, very brutal, to kill, to arrest, to silence, to do everything. But you fought it. You could fight, and as I described the fight with time, it was clear we were going to defeat them. With social inequalities, you are dealing with a very difficult one because you have a situation where the system systematically undermined the greatest majority. Firstly, by depriving them of the centers of activities. They wouldn't be at the place where the economy was taking place. They were not participating. They were not party to decisions of the country. But also, the majority of them were deprived education. The education that they were given was made very inferior. In fact, some South Africans at some point had to leave the country to go and be educated outside because there were no opportunities here. Now, freedom has brought opportunities. The fact that the gap is big to really grab those opportunities is a different matter. But certainly, you can do whatever you want. There are young people today who have succeeded to become business people, who are doing very well, but they are a tiny minority. So the opportunities are there, but the possibilities to take advantage of the opportunities are very difficult.
Durante o apartheid, as escolas frequentadas pelos negros só ofereciam formação para trabalhos de nível médio. Não tinham estrutura, eram superlotadas e os professores mal treinados. Com o fim do regime racista, a população negra passou a ter acesso a um ensino de melhor qualidade. O índice de analfabetismo entre os negros caiu de 50% para 24%. Em 1992, menos de 1% dos estudantes negros chegavam à universidade. Hoje, são 5%. Apesar da melhora, é claro que ainda há muito a ser feito.
And in the course that I'm doing, which is Public Management and Governance, I'm currently doing 4 subjects, which is Public Management and Governance, Politics, Development Studies, and Information Management.
We are living a post-apartheid era. Things have actually improved. There's a lot of development, a lot of foreign interest in the country. There's a lot of investment, which by all that's taking place, it provides improvements, it provides employment, it actually provides a better future for the young generation of South Africa.
We have a lot of people available, but they're not necessarily highly skilled. So we spend a lot of time to make sure that they are very strong and very good at what they do.
O sistema de saúde sul-africano é considerado o melhor do continente. Desde 1994, 500 postos de saúde foram construídos. É um dado positivo, mas não resolve o grande problema da saúde pública do país. A África do Sul lidera o ranking mundial de pessoas infectadas pelo vírus da AIDS. São 5.600.000 pessoas. 17% da população adulta convive com o HIV. Em 2009, 310 mil pessoas morreram em decorrência da doença. O Programa de Reconstrução Nacional implantado pelo governo construiu quase 3 milhões de casas para a população de baixa renda nos últimos 20 anos. 90% dessas residências têm acesso à água. A criação de empregos é o principal desafio do governo sul-africano. A taxa de desemprego hoje é de 25%. Entre os jovens, a situação é ainda pior. Metade deles não tem trabalho. Qual que o senhor diria que é a maior demanda dos jovens? Emprego, estudo, o que é?
Jobs. Jobs is a major one. Because even those who get educated, because of the distorted structure of economy historically, it's very difficult to get jobs. That's the biggest demand, that's the biggest challenge that faces the youth, that faces the country. There are a percentage of the unemployed which is unemployable, but they're not skilled. So the burden is even bigger. However, we are working a number of programs to address the issue, including creating conditions for investment.
Depois de séculos de colonialismo, de décadas de guerras civis, guerras, a África está vivendo um bom momento nos últimos 15, 20 anos. Um momento de paz relativa, há problemas, mas de um modo geral de paz, de democracia, de crescimento econômico. O senhor acha que esse tempo novo veio para ficar ou pode haver retrocesso?
I think Africa is out of the woods. Africa had an unfortunate situation, historically speaking. You will recall that besides slavery that faced Africa, there was a meeting that took place in Europe, I think it was in Germany, where a number of countries met to discuss Africa and actually divided Africa among themselves and therefore colonized Africa. And Africa therefore went through that painful period. But Africa had to fight for its liberation, for decolonization, etc. But when that happened, the world was divided into two blocks, the West and the East. There was Cold War. So as countries were being freed, they were being freed into this world that is divided. They either were under the influence of the West or influence of the East. So with the end of the Cold War, I think for the first time, Africa could stand on its own and begin to take charge of itself. That's a process I think we've come to engage in. And therefore we are able, although old influences don't want to go away, but at least the pressure is better than what it used to be. We can now meet in the AU, take decisions that we can ourselves implement. And therefore the democracy that has come into Africa can no longer go back.
A África do Sul é a maior economia do continente e desempenha um importante papel econômico e político no cenário global. Desde 2011, o país faz parte do BRICS, sigla do Grupo de Economias Emergentes formado também pelo Brasil, pela Rússia, pela Índia e pela China.
I think BRICS is one of the most important groupings that has emerged. Important in many ways. Firstly, the world is changing. I think the old economies are not going to grow very fast. I think they've reached the level where they're no longer going to grow very fast. They are also trapped into old rules and regulations. There is emerging economies that are growing very fast. And they are not small economies. You know, because of the false systems, old economies, even small countries became very rich. We are dealing with very huge countries and therefore coming with very huge economic block in the developing world. That's a reality you can no longer wish it away. Now, the countries that are part of BRICS have very important characteristics that when put together they actually form a huge percentage of the world's population. And yet they are growing, they've got the markets, they've got everything you can think of. They are coming together, forms a very powerful bloc. I think it is good news for the world because we've got people who are looking at the economic growth, the global relations differently than people who have legacies of different types. We are looking at countries who have no attitude towards one another, who are looking at one another as partners, but they also have the resources and possibilities, and I think, and also a lot of political clarity and a belief in the majority of these countries to a democratic process. I think a very important voice is emerging. These countries can take decisions, they can implement decisions that can influence the political and economical landscape. So to me, it is an important bloc that begins to counter the dominant view that has been there for centuries, that was never countered before. Part of the issues we are dealing with, for an example, is the transformation of international institutions. Because you cannot have the bloc or blocks that have economies that are no longer fast growing, who are taking decisions financially about what happens. It is clear now you need the voice of the emerging economies. I think BRICS is an important development for not just for the countries that are in BRICS, but for the global situation as a whole.
Várias etnias, 11 línguas oficiais. Não é à toa que a África do Sul é considerada a nação arco-íris. A construção de um ambiente de harmonia em meio a tanta diversidade étnica é um desafio permanente para a consolidação do processo democrático do país. Os Zulus do presidente Jacob Zuma e os Xhosas de Nelson Mandela são as etnias mais numerosas do país e tiveram um papel fundamental na luta contra o regime racista. O senhor vem de uma família pobre, o seu pai morreu quando o senhor tinha 4 anos de idade, a sua mãe foi empregada doméstica. O senhor algum dia pensou que podia chegar a presidente da África do Sul?
No, not at all. I never thought I would ever be the president of South Africa at my young age. This is when perhaps I was not necessarily politically conscious, but again, at fairly young age, but not so small, I got influence in politics, and later in my youth joined politics, and I really became an active somebody, but never thought I would be the president, even perhaps even at the point when we were liberating ourselves. And after liberation, that thought had never crossed my mind. I'm just saying, it's not just when I was young, even when I was an adult, this was never an issue that crossed my mind.
O senhor foi preso aos 21 anos de idade. Levou 10 anos preso em Robben Island. A prisão, às vezes, esmaga as pessoas, às vezes faz as pessoas crescerem. A sua experiência na prisão, como foi?
To be arrested and to be taken away from the people is not a very pleasant experience. As a young activist who was a breadwinner in the family, I had to go to prison when I knew that my family that depended on me would remain really destitute. And I had taken a decision, they will see how to solve that problem. But going to prison, it was what we had taken a resolution for, that we were prepared to fight and, if need be, to give our supreme sacrifices. So if you went to prison, we knew that you went to prison for the right cause. But, of course, being imprisoned for such a period, much as it deprived us an opportunity to be free, but at the same time, we used prison to help to empower ourselves.
Eu li algo que me impressionou, que o senhor, nos 10 anos que esteve preso em Robben Island, o senhor não recebeu uma visita. Como é que o senhor lidou com isso?
Well, I never got a visit until I was convicted. When I was in Robben Island, we were of course allowed to write one letter in 6 months and receive one response. My feeling at the time was, if I said my mother should visit me, or one of my younger brothers or sisters, or friends, particularly my mother, whom I knew would very much like to see me, the time in the first instance was too little for a visit. And yet, the route or the trip to Robben Island would be very expensive, very long. I then said to my mother, if she's able to have some little money, she must look after my siblings rather than to come and see me, because she will actually waste what she would use in terms of their well-being. And I wrote the letter, therefore, to say, don't worry, I'll come out.
A história do Congresso Nacional Africano, o ANC, se confunde com a história recente da África do Sul. Ele completou 100 anos em 2012. É o maior partido do país. Formou gerações de sul-africanos na luta contra o apartheid. Entre eles, 3 presidentes da República. Muitos dos seus integrantes passaram boa parte da vida presos, no exílio ou na clandestinidade. Banido durante décadas, o Congresso Nacional Africano reconquistou a legalidade em 1990, quando o regime racista dava seus últimos suspiros. Seus líderes, Nelson Mandela, Oliver Tambo, Thabo Mbeki e Jacob Zuma, dirigiram a resistência contra o apartheid e depois costuraram com competência o Acordo Nacional, que jogou a pá de cal no regime racista e instituiu uma democracia multiétnica e multicultural no país. O Congresso Nacional Africano governa a África do Sul desde 1994, quando Mandela foi eleito presidente. Quando é que o senhor sentiu que o regime do apartheid estava já indo ladeira abaixo?
I think towards the mid-80s, personally I had a feeling that things would change in South Africa. This was as a result of few factors. One factor was that the struggle in South Africa had become very strong against the regime by the people inside the country. The struggle of the masses, the struggle by the ANC itself, the underground, the international isolation of South Africa. But there was something also interesting that was going on. Because South Africa wanted to defend itself, it had occupied a particular position with regard to Namibia. Mm-hmm. And because it wanted to defend Namibia, it had engaged itself in Angola. So it was fighting the MPLR, the Cubans, the support of the Soviets, etc.
O processo de independência dos países africanos nas décadas de 60 e 70 logo foi contaminado pelo clima de Guerra Fria entre os Estados Unidos e a então União Soviética. Alegando que era necessário impedir que os comunistas controlassem o sul do continente, o regime racista da África do Sul passou a apoiar com homens e armas o grupo rebelde angolano UNITA, que combatia o governo. Em novembro de 1975, na véspera da independência de Angola, o exército sul-africano invadiu o sul do país. E só não avançou sobre a capital, Luanda, porque Fidel Castro enviou 30 mil soldados cubanos e artilharia antiaérea para conter as tropas invasoras.
At some point, there was a battle that was fought, which is very famous. It's called the Battle of Quito Cunaval, which really indicated that the military might of the apartheid regime was no longer a superior force in the region. You could therefore count that in itself. Without other factors, just the factors I've counted, it was clear that if you gave that struggle, the struggle inside the country, and the struggle as waged by our colleagues, SWAPO, and the involvement of South Africa, a decade would be too much. We would be able to march to Cape Town. And that was my understanding purely from those kind of engagement. But added to that was a factor of the collapse of the socialist bloc. That quickened the process. Once socialism changed, I was very clear, and I remember discussing with my comrades and colleagues in Mozambique, and I was saying to them, in a matter of 5 years, we are likely to be in South Africa. If things are complicated, a decade will be long enough. So, mid-80s, it was very clear in my analysis that the days for apartheid were numbered. So I did have that, and I did feel, indeed, it will come. Part of the reason is because apartheid had used the communist bogey to mobilize support from the Western countries. With the collapse of the socialist countries, that excuse did not exist. And therefore they would find it very difficult to say, help us to fight ANC because if it comes it would bring communists. That was gone. And therefore putting all of these factors together, it was clear to me it was a matter of time.
Qual o legado que Nelson Mandela deixa para a África?
First, I think he would leave a legacy of a leader who was very consistent in his beliefs. The beliefs that were anchored in the ANC policies. A very brave leader who was prepared to sacrifice, and he said so. When he was confronted with life and death, that for the beliefs that he believes in, together with this organization, he was prepared to die. A man who was not bitter, even when he had been in prison for decades. The man who led the struggle, a very complicated struggle, and succeeded to finally defeat the apartheid. The man who was always clear in his ideas, with clarity, clear articulation of his ideas. So a real leader of rare caliber, as Mandela. He's not the only one. The men in the ANC were as good as he was. He himself would tell you that there were leaders who were better than him. Oliver Tambo, like Albert Luthuli, among others, like Moses Kotane, who never even became president, that Mandela himself drew inspiration from. So he would leave that legacy that he never disappointed the ANC from his youth to his adult age. He always undertook the task given to him. Very, very unique man who became the volunteer-in-chief when the volunteers of the ANC were defying the unjust laws. Very outspoken. The man who led the underground, the first commander of the military wing of the ANC, but the negotiator, the peacemaker. These combinations you can only find in the leader of the ANC. One of the two ANC leaders who was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. So he would leave a very good legacy for the continent.
Ao lado do futebol e do cricket, o rugby é uma das paixões dos sul-africanos. Durante muito tempo, o rugby foi rejeitado pela maioria negra. Isso durou até 1995, quando Mandela apelou a todos os sul-africanos para que apoiassem a seleção. A África do Sul venceu o campeonato mundial e o rugby ajudou a escrever um capítulo importante na história da democracia sul-africana. O mundo se espantou muito com o fato de que o Congresso Nacional Africano e o povo da África do Sul, tendo sido submetido a um regime tão odioso como o apartheid, tenha tido a maturidade de abrir negociações com o regime do apartheid e promover uma transição relativamente pacífica para um regime constitucional. Os senhores pensavam que essa seria uma via possível ou os senhores mesmos foram surpreendidos pelos acontecimentos?
Always, from the beginning, from the time the ANC was established, said we wanted a peaceful kind of resolution of our problem. That was uppermost in our struggle. In fact, I remember in the course of our stay in prison, I think it was around 1969, if I remember very well, President Mandela wrote a letter to the Minister of Justice from prison when the regime was talking to other heads of states in the continent about the problem in South Africa. He actually wrote a letter to say, why do you talk to the leaders outside of the country? Here we are. We can avoid the calamity in this country. We need to talk. We need to fix the situation. We need to be responsible leaders. And he said, I'm not writing this letter because I feel the pain of prison. I'm writing it from a responsible position as a leader in this country, that we must avoid the calamity in the country. I think that goes a long way to show how much the ANC was very clear of what we're doing.
No fim da década de 80, a África do Sul era uma nação isolada. Por causa do apartheid, o país sofria boicotes e embargos comerciais em todo o mundo. Com a economia à beira do colapso e acuado pela resistência interna e pela pressão internacional, o governo não teve alternativa a não ser negociar a transferência do poder para a maioria negra do país. Meses depois de assumir o cargo, Frederic de Klerk, o último presidente branco do país, legalizou o Congresso Nacional Africano e outros partidos proibidos e mandou libertar Nelson Mandela e todos os presos políticos. Os 14 milhões de eleitores negros passaram então a ter direito ao voto. Era o começo do fim do regime racista. Em 1993, Mandela e de Klerk dividiram o Prêmio Nobel da Paz. No ano seguinte, Mandela elegeu-se presidente com 62% dos votos.
One of the important points as well was the agenda of those talks, more than anything. Many that I've observed, when they get into that discussion, they discuss the Constitution. We did not start there. We agreed the Constitution of a country cannot be made by people who had no mandate from the people. Mm-hmm. We needed a mandate, and therefore people who could negotiate a constitution will be the people who will be elected by the people. That we needed to solve the political issues. And once we solve the political issues, we would then, having agreed, in order to move into the new dispensation, we'll then agree on an interim constitution, which will be a constitution to facilitate the transition. Only which will then even have the rules and regulations how to run elections. Those people who will then be elected will be in parliament. They will then from time to time convene as an assembly to draw the constitution because they have the direct mandate from the people.
Companheiros de luta e de exílio, Thabo Mbeki e Jacob Zuma combateram juntos o apartheid. Os dois ocuparam os cargos máximos na hierarquia do Congresso Nacional Africano e foram eleitos 2 vezes para comandar o país, em 1999 e 2004. A parceria acabou em 2005, quando Zuma, vice-presidente, foi acusado pelo Ministério Público de receber propina num contrato de venda de armas para o exército sul-africano. Mbeki afastou Zuma do cargo.
It would be best to release Honorable Jacob Zuma from his responsibilities as Deputy President of the Republic and member of the Cabinet.
Zuma foi inocentado.
I'm therefore not convinced that the applicant was incorrect in averring political meddling in his prosecution.
E na saída do tribunal, surpreendeu o povo que o esperava do lado de fora. Em vez de discursar, cantou. No dia que o judiciário desqualificou as acusações de corrupção contra o senhor, eu assisti uma cena na televisão que me impressionou muito. Quando o senhor saiu do tribunal e o povo estava reunido lá de fora e se esperava que o senhor fizesse uma declaração ou um discurso, o senhor cantou e dançou uma música Zulu, que é um Chiniwami, que quer dizer, segundo a tradução que me certa, tragam a minha metralhadora. O senhor acha que aquela sua canção valeu mais do que meu discurso naquele dia?
Well, that song is a song of the struggle. I have a problem with people who say it is saying now let us go to war. Not at all. It's a song about the struggle. What that we used to sing, that gave us inspiration, that gave us morality. And here I was, with allegations and everything. I think I needed inspiration, I needed morality, I needed to feel that I'm ready to fight, whether allegations or not. Now, I couldn't sing any other thing. I did not just sing that song alone, by the way. I sang other songs too.
Não, eles cantaram junto com o senhor.
Yes, of course they sang with me. They knew the song.
O Chaminewa, que em Zulu quer dizer tragam a minha metralhadora, era o hino dos combatentes do Congresso Nacional Africano que pegaram em armas contra o apartheid. O senhor sempre foi muito ligado ao presidente Mbeki. Os senhores trabalharam junto na organização da resistência, os senhores fizeram parte da equipe de negociação, ele foi presidente, o senhor foi presidente, mas alguns anos atrás os senhores chegaram a um confronto sério que quase dividiu o partido, o ANC. Eu queria saber como são as suas relações hoje com o presidente Mbeki.
Well, they are cordial. We respect each other. I don't think there is any difficulty. But we did not differ on the ANC policies. I think the problem was at a point when there was a decision to remove the deputy president. That, I think, that was an issue. Yes. But that was not because of politics. It was not as a result of political differences. I think it was informed by different things.
Mas era o quê, então? Uma rivalidade pessoal? Uma luta de poder? O que dividiu Mbeki e Zuma?
Well, I wouldn't know. I wouldn't know because perhaps it's me who was removed, and I never understood up to this day why. Because you couldn't say it was because of performance, or it was because we differed politically on policies or whatever. I think there were allegations made, and on the basis of those allegations, as a president, he took specific actions. And I think some people in the ANC thought he was right, some people thought he was not right. Then that became an issue, that we're contesting for a position, not because we're fighting politically. I think it was a question of Mbeki feeling he could still stand. The constitution allowed him to stand in the ANC for the third term. And other people in the ANC said, no, we think that to stand for the third term is not right, because you are going to have somebody else being a president. If we have somebody else who's a president of the country, is not the president of the party, maybe that would cause problems. And that's what the contestation was, that just in terms of those issues. So I would say, if we stress that there were political differences, that's just a perception I'm trying to deal with, that from my point of view, this kind of conflict or tension that arose was informed by other things, maybe hidden political issues, I don't know.
Esses dirigentes que já não vão vir mais da luta histórica, eles têm o mesmo sentido, o mesmo rumo dos que vieram lá de trás?
I don't think, whether we are talking about the new generation or whatever, you could have people who could come in and change the policies of the ANC. For the day you do so, you would have lost the traditions of the ANC, and I'm not sure where you'll end up. Critically, it is the policies that the ANC pays very specific attention to. ANC policies are not old policies. They're not as old as the leaders that you see. They're very fresh. They deal with the issues of today, and therefore they deal with the demands and desires of the youth. So insofar as the leadership, I don't think you could say the leadership that is here is following old policies. Not at all. It is very new policies. And therefore, that's why in the ANC context, it is not the leaders, it is not the age, it is a policy. The old leadership will grow old and will come out, and the new leadership will come in. That has been the process of the ANC. At one point, Mandela was a young man in the ANC, very military, not a leader. But at some point, he became an old man, a leader. We are here today at this generation. We are getting a little bit old, and I'm sure the younger generation will come.
Absolvido, Zuma tornou-se o grande nome do partido. O presidente Mbeki, em fim de mandato, saiu muito desgastado do episódio e a amizade entre os dois nunca mais foi a mesma. Em 2008, Mbeki perdeu o apoio do próprio partido e foi forçado a renunciar à presidência da República. Meses depois, Zuma foi eleito presidente.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for coming today of the new president.
No tempo do apartheid, Soweto era uma área fechada. Quem quisesse entrar ou sair tinha de se identificar com um passe. Assim, a polícia controlava os habitantes do gueto. Hoje, Soweto é uma cidade aberta. Todo mundo pode caminhar, circular livremente. Suas ruas são largas e limpas, com calçadas e árvores. Ela tem escolas, hospitais, universidades, shoppings, áreas de lazer, praças, tem muita coisa. Soweto tem problemas? Soweto tem problemas. Os jovens não têm o trabalho que precisam, querem mais qualificação profissional, querem mais oportunidades. Eles sabem que conquistaram muito nas 2 últimas décadas, mas querem mais. E é bom que seja assim, porque é lutando, reivindicando e trabalhando que eles vão poder construir uma África do Sul melhor para eles e para seus filhos.
O senhor acha que o gap, a diferença entre os ricos e os pobres, aumentou ou diminuiu depois
do fim do apartheid?
Our society before 1994 was distorted. You had a population that was centered around the developed areas. And even the statistics of what the population was distorted. The relationship, huge majority were not allowed to come to the cities. So even if you wanted to know what was the gap, nobody in fact even talked about it. But once we reached our freedom, you removed these barriers of the infrastructure control, etc. People from rural areas came in big numbers in their free countries to the cities. And we began to count all citizens as citizens of this country. And therefore, the number that artificially looked smaller of the blacks that were staying in the urban areas, now the total real numbers emerged. And therefore you realize how big the gap was.
The country is democratic, yes, we are free, but the other race is still in bondage of being economically deprived. It is to us today that we should shout very high and say it is now time for economic freedom in our lifetime, because of we are not yet really free.
There's only a few things that's actually make life not so easy anymore. Is the crime, number one, that everybody knows about. If they could just do something about the crime, then it's a lovely place to live in South Africa.
Because in South Africa for so many years we were isolated from the rest of the world, but also from the rest of Africa. So the concept of anyone in South Africa going anywhere out of South Africa, they would say, are you going into Africa? Assuming that we're not part of Africa. I think slowly we're becoming part of Africa. And I think it's the more and more we show visually and also through reporting different parts of Africa to South Africa.
Now, post-apartheid, we can mingle with white people, black people, coloureds, Indians, Chinese. We can do business with them. Not like before, but there's still that minority of group of white people who still think it's still in the apartheid times, but times have moved on.
I think Africa is on a rise. Politically, I think we understand our unity better, but also economically. We are actually doing better than any other time before. We are now forming integrated kind of regions economically. We are now encouraging intra-trade, which in the past was not there. It was done with the former mother countries. We are working on a huge program of the infrastructure in the continent.
Integrated one.
So we are actually moving forward. I don't think we'll ever go back. We have reduced the tensions and pockets of tensions in the continent. And we've got machineries dealing with that. So I think Africa is out of the woods. We are moving forward.
Like a panic mechanic, flowing on Titanic. People give me papa kamorojo. Kijaka litsojo, my name is Achie. Achibutelezi, I'm the king of Mahlati. Nawe uyazazi bengi bone ushos nega bamu washa bamu nega. Ngisati nyamochela, angchela ngo Amanda, otlala edlamini, udla emini, udraviti ya tora enepele uyatura Soweto. Kulang puma kona Soweto. It's where I come from, Soweto. Kulang puma kona Soweto. It's like a panic mechanic flowing on Titanic. People give me papa kamorojo. Kijaka litsojo, my name is Achie. Achibutelezi, I'm the king of Matla. Soweto, kulang puma kona Soweto. It's where I come from, Soweto. Kulang puma kona Soweto. Kulang puma kona is like a life orientation, is like a paraffin. Fanano yovuga kseni uyo kupep chanin. Minang pume vila kasa vila the street ya mangeting shayikon. Ubabu Mandela, mangeting shayikon. Desmond Tutu, mangeting shayikona, ubaba wetu, umamu Afrika, Winnie Mandela, mangeting shayikona, usakhumuze, mangeting shayikona, unambita, ungangithathi kancane, mangiculela belunge, ngoba kwazi ukuthi sasala mingiphathele Soweto, kulangiphuma khona West, Soweto, kulangiphuma khona West, Soweto, kulangiphuma khona West.